Are you sick, tired, and fed up with kids these days talking about trauma, and you think that they're just making a big deal out of nothing and that kids today are just weak, and you want to remind them that things were not such a party when you were little, and if they want something to cry about, you'll give them something to cry about? Or maybe you're the opposite. Maybe you feel like there's a danger around every corner and a criminal on every playground, and you feel like the only thing you can do is lock your child away in a tower so that no one and nothing can hurt them. What's the truth about trauma? Find out today on Bad Kids Don't Exist. Hello everyone, and welcome to Bad Kids Don't Exist, the podcast designed to help adults better understand kids, to create environments where kids and their caregivers can thrive. My name is Stuart Perry. I am a licensed clinical social worker, child therapist, keynote speaker, and autism spectrum disorder clinical specialist. If you're looking for more videos about children's mental health and how to best support the little ones in your life, this is the channel for you. Make sure you like and subscribe so you don't miss out on any of the mental health fun, resources, and training that we have going on here. Today, I'll be talking about trauma and what it means to be triggered. When I was younger, I had a trauma of my own. There was a group that came to my school when I was in elementary school, and the group is called Stranger Danger. Maybe you've heard of Stranger Danger. Maybe I'm not the only one who had this group come to my school. Stranger Danger's whole message, at least to me, was at some point in your life, someone is going to try to kidnap you. I hope you're ready when it happens. They showed pictures of children who were still missing, and they told these dramatic, intense stories about what will happen to you when someone tries to kidnap you. They even had a dog with them, and the dog was a search and rescue dog, so they'd show how the dog could find a dead body of a child once they had been kidnapped and killed and buried. They went on and on about don't ever get in the trunk of the car. Once you're in the trunk of the car, everything is over. They even told us that if you were at a movie theater, to not go to the bathroom by yourself, because hiding in the stalls of the bathroom would be kidnappers standing on toilets, so that when you opened the stall door, the kidnapper would grab you, pull you in, cover your mouth, and then any screams that anyone heard, they would just think that was part of a movie. This was terrifying for me. When we got back to my class, my amazing, amazing teacher, Miss Nielsen, I could go on and on and on about how awesome of a teacher Miss Nielsen was. But when we got back to class, Miss Nielsen could kind of tell that things were not okay in the classroom. She could tell that we were very frazzled. And she said, "Tell me what you think about the program we just saw." And different kids said different things. One said that they thought it was really cool to watch the dog do a takedown. One said that they were going to go home and practice the hold, break free technique that they had shown us. I raised my hand and I said, I am terrified. And I hope I don't ever forget what Miss Nielsen said. She said, it's really important to be aware. It's not important to be afraid. That set my little mind going a bit, but I'll say that trauma carried on for a long time. Anytime I was at home alone, I was terrified, to the point where I just really wasn't left at home alone. Anytime I walked outside of my house, I was constantly on alert for people who were coming to kidnap me. It even got so bad that at night, I couldn't sleep in my room by myself for fear that someone was going to crawl in through the window, kidnap me, carry me out, put me in the trunk of the car, and then go do whatever they were going to do. That continued until middle school. I was in 7th grade, and finally my parents were like, okay, we're not doing this anymore. This just can't continue. So they found me a therapist, and I was able to process some of that trauma, work through it, resolve it for the most part. But then in high school, Stranger danger was coming back to my high school. They told us the day before, and I went home and I told my parents, I don't think that I can go to that program. I had a tightness in my chest and a lump in my throat. It did not feel like I was going to make it. So my parents talked with the therapist, and then they wrote a letter to the school saying that I would not be participating in stranger danger. And I can even remember that my English teacher, the one whose class we were going to leave to go to the program, when I told her I wasn't going to be allowed to go to stranger danger, she laughed at me because the therapist and my parents had said it could trigger in me a trauma reaction to take me back to being a little kid scared out of my mind. And in that moment, as my teacher was laughing, and even in that moment when I was in Miss Nielsen's class and the other kids seemed to be having a good time with it, I felt so weird. It felt so strange to me that I had this big reaction, and these other kids seemed to have no problem at all with it. And that is how trauma works. It can be different for every single person. But as we talk about trauma, I want to remind you of what Miss Nielsen said to me. It's important to be aware. It's not important to be afraid. Our world today is built on fear. There is a 24/7 news cycle that is constantly pumping out fear. There are tons of videos on YouTube all about how afraid you should be in the world today. There are social media channels, handles completely devoted to telling you how scared you need to be in the world today. As you're watching this, maybe you're a parent who thinks like I did after that stranger danger program, and you believe that there is danger lurking around every single corner, waiting to jump out and get your kids. Today, I hope to show you the truth and help you to be more aware, not more afraid. To start, I'd like to talk about what it means to be triggered. I think if we can understand more about this whole triggered thing, it can help our conversation about trauma. Let me start with my definition of triggered. To me, triggered is when something causes a reaction in your mind and body because of a reminder typically related to trauma. If you think of a gun, if there's no ammo in the gun, then when you pull the trigger, nothing happens. But if there's ammunition in the gun, then when you pull the trigger, the gun fires. Trauma is that ammunition. It's that loaded up thing that's ready and something might set it off. Today, there are things called trigger warnings. And those trigger warnings are basically just a heads up that there are difficult topics that are going to be discussed. So if you are someone with that loaded trauma ammunition, or if you're someone who just doesn't want to hear about these things, here's the heads up right now that that is on the way. And it gives people a way to stop listening or stop watching if it's something they just don't want to expose their mind to. Emotional triggers suck. It sucks to not feel good. But let me say this. Even when you are not feeling good, and even if you feel triggered, it does not give you an out to treat someone poorly. Let me take it even further. Even if someone knows your triggers, it is not their job to walk on eggshells avoiding those triggers at all times. Now, yes, everyone should do their best to be respectful, but if you are consistently triggered, you are the one who needs to do some work. It is not other people who need to be more careful around you. One thing you'll hear me say often is mental health difficulties can explain disruptive behaviors. They do not excuse disruptive behaviors. So now that we've taken some time to understand that trigger and how trauma can be loaded as ammunition, let's talk about what the trauma really is. What is trauma? My definition of trauma is being exposed to something your body and mind are not at all prepared to deal with. For me, stranger danger was traumatic. For other kids, stranger danger is nothing at all. It's important to know that it's not what you think the person should be capable of tolerating. It's their individual perception of what their mind and their body are not at all prepared to deal with. There are some things that happen in our brains. It's not just kids being soft. It's not just people being soft when they go through trauma. There are actual reactions that happen in the brain. There is a chemical in the brain called cortisol. Cortisol is the brain's stress hormone or stress chemical. When someone goes through a traumatic experience, the brain gets flooded with that cortisol at such intense levels for such extended periods of time that their brain decides it needs to just constantly stay stressed out and on alert to protect itself. Rather than coming down and then having to redose the cortisol, the brain says, you know what? If we are at this level, we might as well just stay at this level, because if we come down, something might come out and get us. And the brain continues to pump itself full of this cortisol, this stress chemical. That's why that jumpiness happens, because a person is constantly being pumped full of stress. You and I know when we're stressed, we're more on edge, more ready to jump out. When the brain is pumped full of that chemical, it creates that jumpiness, that alertness, what we in mental health call a hypervigilance, always on the lookout for danger. Flashbacks are the brain saying it's important to not forget what happened because it's going to happen again. So I need to constantly remind you of what happened so that we don't end up in that same situation again. It's pumping the brain full of that stress chemical. Then there are things called avoidances, where people will stay away from anything that reminds them of the trauma. That is the brain trying to stay away from any reminder of that horrible feeling, that horrible pressure that it was under. If you're interested in knowing more about what happens in the brain during trauma, you can check out this video for a full explanation of a child's brain function after they've undergone a traumatic event. People often think that trauma can only come from something like war or violence. As a matter of fact, PTSD used to just be called shell shock because it seemed like only people who had been in the military could experience it. So what happened? There once was a misunderstanding of what could cause trauma. It used to be believed that only experiencing an event could cause the trauma, but we now know they can experience it. It can actually happen to them. They can witness it in real life. They can watch it happen, or they can be exposed to it by either watching it on a screen or even just hearing detail about it. The reason you can experience a trauma response by simply witnessing or being exposed to a traumatic event is because of some things in the brain called mirror neurons. And they are amazing. They're mainly located in the front part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex. And those neurons in your brain are actually communicating with other people's neurons. Your brain and other people's brains are in communication because of these mirror neurons. Mirror neurons were discovered by some scientists doing experiments with monkeys. They had the monkeys eat bananas, and they used a functional MRI to see which parts of the brain would activate in the monkey as they were eating the banana. Then they had monkeys watch other monkeys in their pack eat bananas. They used a functional MRI to see which parts of the brain activated as they watched other monkeys. And they saw that the parts of the brain that activated when the monkey was eating the banana and the parts of the brain that activated when the monkey was watching another monkey eat the banana were exactly the same. A monkey could watch another monkey eat a banana, and their brain would fire as if they were the ones eating the banana. We have this happen to us as well as humans. The reason you yawn when someone in a room yawns is because of these mirror neurons. Little fun fact though, you'll actually only yawn if you're close with the person. Not close physically to the person, but close emotionally or mentally with the person. If they yawn, you will end up yawning because your mirror neurons are talking to each other. It's also the reason we like movies. As we're watching a movie, our brain is firing these mirror neurons and putting us in the story. We become the hero. It's why we can go on an emotional roller coaster just by watching something on a screen. The reason that being exposed to things too young can be traumatizing is because kids' brains' mirror neurons are firing as they watch these things, as they listen to people talk about these things, and they are putting themselves in that situation. As adults, we can distance ourselves and we can say, I realize I am not actually in that situation. A lot of times we can make that distinction. Children have a really hard time when their brains fire and tell them they're in something. They have a really hard time making distance. It's why kids will talk to TV screens, whereas adults might hear a question on the TV screen, but they're not going to respond right there in the moment. If children's minds are exposed to traumatizing events or traumatizing details too young, their brains tell them it's happening to them. Kids today have far too much access to being exposed to things their minds and bodies are not at all prepared to handle. And that's interesting because statistics show that the world is safer and kids feel safer than ever before. Duke University did a longitudinal study where they tracked every year along the way from 1975 until 2012. And this was to track the level of children's safety. It took into account a lot of different behaviors that children exhibit, as well as things that were done to children. And their research finds that children's overall safety related to the behaviors both they show and the behaviors that are done to them, children's safety has increased by 51.4%. We hear all the time about the good old days when kids were so much safer. Kids are much safer today. The statistics show they are at least 50% safer today than back in 1975. The low point for children's safety happened in 1977, but there was another close low in 1994. 1994. I want you to hold on to that number, 1994, as the low point in children's safety. Hold on to it because we're going to come back to it. I think it's really important. In 1975, 83 out of every 1,000 kids had been victimized by violent crime. In 2012, 35.9, 40 per 1,000 kids had been victimized by violent crime. That's a decrease by half. It halved itself. Children being victimized by violent crime was cut in half between 1975 and 2012. But there was a high point. Children were most victimized by violent crime in 1994. Do you see that number coming up again? 1994. Hold on to it. We're going to come back to it. They also did statistics on children committing violent crimes. This is called the offender rate. 31 kids out of every 1,000 were committing violent crimes in 1975. In 2012, that number fell to just 4.6 kids per 1,000 kids. But the high point was in 1993. Hold on to that number. We got 93, 94. Hold on to that number because it's very important. It's also been documented that sexual abuse has declined by over 62% since 1990. Physical abuse has come down by 56% since 1990. If you look at the trends, you have to see the world is not the same today. And that's a great thing. I asked you to hold on to those numbers, 1993 and 1994, because that's when some high points of children being unsafe happened. The reason that's important is because back when people like you and people like me were growing up, the world wasn't so safe for us. As parents, when we were young kids, we were exposed to this world that was pretty chaotic and pretty unsafe. What is happening in our world today is that because during our developmental stage, where we were learning if we could trust the world or not, our brains learned we could not trust this world. Now we are living as if our children today are in the same world that we lived in when we were growing up. But the world is not the same today. It's safer by nearly every measurable margin. And what I believe is happening is we are preparing kids for the trauma we faced when we were kids. But we need to make sure we are not exposing kids' minds to thoughts of traumas we think they might experience, or you think that they're experiencing now. Because if we start to expose kids to this world that we have dreamed up is still the same as when we were young, when we were their age, when things really were chaotic and dangerous, if we are exposing their minds to those things, what will happen is their mirror neurons will fire as if it's true, and their brains will become traumatized because of something that doesn't even exist. I believe the main thing traumatizing kids today is us, the adults. We are making kids think they need to be ready for things they don't need to be ready for, and they will never need to be ready for. We are taking our trauma from when we were kids and when we were growing up in this chaotic world where we didn't know who or what we could trust. And we have been triggered as we watch our kids today. I want to remind you of what Miss Nielsen told me. It's important to be aware. It's not important to be afraid. And now you're aware. Even though there are so many more cameras and so much more broadcasting time, The world is safer today than it has ever been for kids. So for you as a parent, what's the difference between being aware and being afraid? Afraid is very reactive and always looking for something to happen and looking for some danger and trying to control the world and never letting your child even experience discomfort, not just danger, but discomfort, trying to shield your child from any discomfort. That is fear. If you do that, your child's resilience will plummet because they won't have the skills to work through some difficulties on their own. Awareness is proactive and it's rational. It means taking steps to prevent anything major from happening. It doesn't mean trying to control your child, put them in a bubble, and lock them away in a tower. It means, what are the real odds that something traumatic could happen here? And taking steps to mitigate those dangers. The world is not the same today as when you and I were kids. And that is a great, great thing. We can now be aware. We don't have to be afraid. And we can help our kids do the same. If you're interested in hiring me for your next event as a keynote speaker or workshop leader, click the link in the description to this video or head over to badkidsdon'texist.com, click on booking. I can't wait to hear the details for your event and how we can make it a success together. This video right here, I'm not sure where it will be, but this video, you can check out this video right here. Is that right? Oh, no, this way. There we go. You can check out this video to learn more.